Changing gears again, quick few comments about commercial installations. Export limitation, this is so common now in Queensland that I'm not going to go into export limitation particularly, except to say that zero doesn't always mean zero. So you are allowed to export up to 1% of your inverter capacity, or sometimes up to 2% of a dedicated transformer capacity for a site. So I've got some graphs I'm going to show you in a sec, and what you'll see is that even though this particular site that I'll show you the graphs from is supposedly zero export, in actual fact we're allowed to export a little bit. Ramping rates, this is just how smoothly we can increase or decrease the inverter's output to match the load. You want the smallest steps and the smoothest operation as possible. And then network protection. Systems over 30 kilowatts, utilities say, well, look, we understand that your inverters will turn off if the voltage is too high or too low, or the frequency is out of range, et cetera, but our grid is worth a lot of money to us, and we want to protect it. So we want you to install secondary protection. And when you get into the really big projects, the megawatt style, then the requirements around this really ramp up. So here's an example of a zero export system, 60 kilowatt installation on the Gold Coast. You can see that this was actually a beautiful sunny day. And if there had not have been an export limitation system on this install, you would have seen a classic sort of green bell curve there for the solar. But because the load was up and down, the solar system was ramped up and down to follow the load. On a weekend, because this building on the Gold Coast is an office building and there's no one there on the weekend, so one of yours? Nice. You can see that we have actually been allowed to export a little bit because that particular site has a dedicated transformer. So we're allowed to export a bit there. Just an example of what a network protection relay looks like, some of the requirements that you're going to find in installing network protection, and photos of a couple of boards that we produce and supply for our customers to do this. So both of these boards that will do both zero export as well as network protection. Now, of course, most systems in the commercial space are less than 100 kilowatts because of STCs. I've seen some people, putting in 100 kVA of AC inverter capacity, matched up with 99 kilowatts of DC module capacity. I think you're probably spending too much on your inverters, frankly. Aim for something like 90 kVA AC on your inverters, and think of that as being similar to 6 kilowatts of panels on a 5 kilowatt inverter. Network approvals can take a whole lot longer than the residential space, so if you haven't gone through it before, give yourself a bit of space. Over 100 kilowatts, obviously no STCs, so the upfront is higher. Network protection requirements can really climb as well, and that means that you have to use larger and more sophisticated and frankly more expensive network protection relays. And don't forget to put in fully approved monitoring for LGCs. I've heard of installations where this was an afterthought, or it wasn't done correctly, or, in some regard, the LGC monitoring was just not locked down at the time of installation, and 12 months can go past and those LGCs are effectively lost. Lots of costs in commercial systems. I'll just point out a few to make sure you're aware of them, including, of course, the fees from the utilities for applications and cash flow on extended payment terms. I know of installers who have done projects for large organisations, name brand Australian companies, and then they've been strung out on payment, and that can be very painful for cash flow. Here's an example of some of the costs around the country. Essential and Endeavour are very nice people and actually let you apply for free, but Ergon and Energex are in there getting their pound of flesh, I guess. One of the things we do to help people tackle commercial projects, perhaps commercial projects for the first time, if you've been primarily in the residential sector, is we can produce SLDs for your project. Just to sort of zoom in, here in the bottom left of the diagram, you can see we've got CTs in there connected to one of our boards, along with an E-gauge monitoring system. E-gauge is actually the unit that was showing us these graphs earlier that we were looking at for that Gold Coast install. And then up with the inverters, you can see we're actually using radio networking equipment here. So this is an example of where the feed-in limiter board is adjacent to the MSB, but then the inverter locations are somewhere else. And at times, you can run physical cable hardwired, and that's great if that works. At other times, that can be very difficult or impossible, and it is possible to use radio networking equipment, which we can provide. Quick comment on the E-gauge. It is an interesting piece of kit. Class 1 accuracy and 12 CT inputs, which means that on a 3-phase project, you can monitor the site load as well as the inverter performance, and then, say, 2 other sub-circuits. On a single phase, you could be doing as many as 12 circuits. And just a very quick comment on clip lock. I mention this because I've seen people come unstuck on clip lock. We offer clip lock clamps from Clenergy. They have a single clamp that suits 4 different roof profiles. So any of the 4 profiles, that clamp is perfectly acceptable and you know, engineered for use. But the profiles themselves have very different numbers of connection points or attachment points required. So if you look at a roof and you think, it's clip lock, you know, probably 700, yeah, and you work out how many clamps you needed, and let's say it was 1,000. If you find out later, no, it's not clip lock 700, it's clip lock 406, you will need not 1,000, you'll need 2,200. And that's a lot more money, and it's a lot more install because you're having to put them so much more close together. So just be really careful about that. The difference between worst case, best case and worst case is like that. It's not close.